everyone has a different background. You've had a great playing career. You transitioned to coaching after school, after college. Kind of, can you walk us through like how it all started for you, like the idea of coaching? Um, you know, we come from a family of coaches, in that manner. So, I get it from that front. But were there other factors too that really, played a role in being like, this is what I want to do. This is what I see myself doing, if for the next X amount of years.
Yeah. Well, it's, probably we have similar upbringings in a lot of ways, Brett. I'm sure you're born into the game, right? You have a stick in your hand pretty early, right? So I was lucky enough to have, dad, right from the start, right? So he put
Mhm.
the lax bug, in me pretty early. And so that was the best, right? So growing up, just playing in the backyard with him and it just like fostered a love for the game and knew like, I want to be a part of the game no matter what facet it was, right? So took it as a player as far as I could and didn't want to give it away, right? So,
Mhm.
in growing up where I was in Western Mass, not exactly like a hotbed of players, but the coaches that I had exposure to growing up was unreal, right? So you
Mhm.
had obviously Coach Cannell at UMass, you had Keith Bugby at Springfield, John Kopacki at Western New England, right? Like Amherst is right there for us too. So I was exposed to a lot of really good coaches at a super young age. And
Mhm.
even in around the area, like you take like a Jim Warnock, right, who's just an incredible coach. Like I think like the most underrated youth high school coach, in New England, certainly. So learning from those guys and like seeing the impact that it had on me, and I wanted to pay it forward, right? So I did NCAA right out of school at Western New England for 2 years and kind of realized like, I don't know if that's the path that I quite wanted to go down in the game. Went club, as a club director for a few years as well. Didn't love club all that much and kind of what that turned out to be for me.
Mhm.
And so like boarding school was, like Three Little Bears, right? It was like just right for me, going from public school to boarding school and realizing the effect that, those coaches had on me in all different sports, really. I was like, all right, I want to have that effect on a young man and preparing him for the goals that he has, whether it's college or not, at that next level. But the impact that I had in boarding school, set the fire for me. It was like, all right, this is the spot that's going to be best for me.
Yeah, and kind of with that, you joined the Frederick Gunn School in 2023, right?
Yep.
Coaching under Mike Marich. And as you take over, the role and you as the new head coach, what was a part about the team, the school, Mike, that drew you there, that made you say, I want to be a part of it? And kind of, now that being the leader of the team, kind of where do you see that vision for the program as well?
Yeah, sure. So, well, I first met Mike as a competitor, really, right? So I was the head coach previously in NEPSAC at Williston for 5 years, and so Mike and I
Mhm.
competed for a number of years, and so I got to know him as a coach, which is fantastic. But more of just like him, who he is as a person, and the values that he stands for. I always really respected him, and it was reflected in his team. Like the Gun kids were always really respectful, but like they played the game the right way, right? So they had, a certain toughness to them when they played, but also played the game the right way, right? So played hard, played respectfully. And I valued that, right? That's something, that I saw with Mike that I wanted to emulate too, right? So we moved down to this area in 2023 and Mike asked me to be on board. So I jumped right onto it, right? So kind of taking a step back from a head coach to just like being that offensive coordinator was nice. And kind of, we had two little kids, so it kind of worked out really well. And so I got to learn a ton from Mike this year, these past 2 years, right? So super thankful for, what he's taught me and, you know, kind of taking over our big shoes to fill, certainly had a big role as the coach, but also like as his role here on campus had a really big, effect on a lot of kids, not just lacrosse players.
Mhm.
Um, so it's kind of building off Mike, what he's built here. The program was really small when he took over. He was here for about, I think it was 14 years. And so he put in a ton of work, right, to build where it is now. And so I want to kind of continue to build, what he's already put in place. Right. And so with that comes for us is, it's a small school, right? So we're 330 students. So it's not a lot of boys, that we have, right? So being able to find the right type of boys as players, but also as young men, because they're going to have more of an effect on campus than just on the lacrosse team, right? So getting those kids that are certainly lacrosse focused is great for us, where, in the years that I've been here, it was kind of a mix, right? So we had, a strong core of lacrosse first kids, then we're sprinkling in those second sport guys, those hockey guys, those soccer players, which was great, but in order to increase competitively, you want to kind of flip flop that, right? So we're kind of towards more now of majority of lacrosse first players, and that kind of back third being, those second sport guys, right? So that's something we always want to continue to build on, right? Getting more lacrosse first kids through the door and on campus. And then it's, certainly of the schedule change that we've had this year is we're adding, more of those West 1 teams, right? So the competitive level is certainly gonna take a step up, right? Which is great. So, those are the teams that you want to compete against, right? So for us being competitive in those games, we need to get more lacrosse first guys and continue to develop them, whether they're the young guys or, later on, in their careers, if they make a transition from their current school to Gunn, that's something that I want to see us continue to do.
Yeah. And when you talk about, development, like I find that to be, such an interesting conversation too, especially, in the world of prep, because, the seasons are short, right? There's limited off-season opportunities. So how do you balance that, being the offensive coordinator, now the head coach, like how do you balance that and build that into developing those players, not just as lacrosse players, but also, good people, right?
Yeah.
Good kids on campus, right? Because you're trying
Right.
to build them whole, like you said, you mentioned it, like you want to, you're helping them at a part of their life where they're about to go off on their own in a year or two. So like how do you what is kind of the way you try to do that, in your role there right now?
Yeah. So when we get kids on campus, right, when they come in for their visit and they see Gunn, they give the tour and everything like that, like when we sit down and we talk with them, we tell them, us being a small school, that, we wouldn't survive if you just came here as a lacrosse player. Like it's just not an option for us, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be playing a second sport, or you're going to be playing a third sport, which I think is great, because that sports specialization, I mean, we could go off on that too, but that's, an epidemic, I think, being a 3-sport athlete myself in high school,
Right.
where they're involved in other sports, but they're also involved on campus, right? Whether they're a prefect in the dorm in a leadership position, or they're giving a tour guide and things like that. They just have their hands in a lot of different pots here at Gunn, because that's the ecosystem of the campus being a smaller school, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think, holistically, that helps with their development of just getting them uncomfortable if they think they're coming here just as a lacrosse player, right? We want to see them involved in a lot of different things, and that's going to continue to build you, as a person. And you get more and more on your plate as you kind of work your way through it, compared from a 9th grader to a 12th grader. Right. So it's really cool to see kids grow. But I think Gunn does a fantastic job, as a lot of schools do, but being smaller, it's advantageous, I think, for us, of just what's around them and what they need to get involved in. The lacrosse piece of it. Yeah, that's a major constraint, right? In terms of the time of the season. And there's a constraint even with it, Brett, in the time of practice, right? So
Yeah.
it's different, right? So my dad coached public high school for 28 years, right? And if he wanted to go 45 minutes longer and get it right, like he was able to do that, right? But it's we're an hour 30 or an hour 45, depending on the day. And you got to pick and choose, right? Are we going to watch film on this day and kind of take off some practice time? And so that's a really big decision that we got to make on almost a daily basis, right? When we're in season, right? In my,
Mm-hmm.
mindset, and how I've always kind of approached it at the high school level, is I'm a huge proponent of like player development, skill development, small sided touches, compared to, all right, we're going to be 6-on-6 one side for 30 minutes, right? Because I believe in compounding effects, right? The more touches we can get in our player sticks, the more decisions we have them making, the drills that we put in that make them uncomfortable, our principles of play that we put in our constraints in those drills, I value those reps throughout that hour and a half, whatever we may have on that day, where I think that's how they're going to get better, right? And that's how we're going to get better as a group. But you can get the skill set up, if you can get the decision making up, that's where at the high school level, you're those unforced turnovers, right? Or those one more passes that I see that I want them to make, right? Or the clearing space for each other that I want them to make, right? If we're able to, put that in a smaller sided game, it's going to put them in an environment when it comes to the game. They're going to be able to make those decisions quicker versus, I want you to run this offense, right? And have it be a little more scripted on things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And the more you talk with coaches, especially nowadays, as the game has kind of developed over the, I shouldn't say it developed or evolved. Like we say, like the foundations of the sport are the same, right? Like everything that we learned growing up, is probably pretty similar to how we're teaching it, right? But there's just different strategies how to execute it. And like you said, like there's a lot of two-man in today, two-man play. But it's just interesting to me, like you mentioned principles of play, right? And I think that is huge because I think if players can learn how to play off of principles, as opposed to, I know you know to like sets, and like sticking in
Yeah.
certain positions, like are there certain principles, that you're working on like every day in practice, like spacing? And can you kind of maybe give a sneak, kind of a little peek into like what that looks like of how you would implement like a principle into one of those small sided games?
Yeah, for sure. So we have like a few principles, right, on offense, and I think it changes year to year, right? There's more turnover in a boarding school roster than anywhere else, I think, in
Yeah.
terms of what you're graduating, and then you're adding kids at all different grades, right? So it's kind of hard. I have things in my mind of where I think our group's going to be based on what we're returning, but you never really know until you get through your spring break or whatever that trip may be.
Sure.
When it comes to that, right? So, but our principles, like, I think tempo is a really big principle of what we do, right? So tempo in ball movement, tempo in off ball movement, like being static, right, is like the worst thing, right? So, you know, playing with tempo, I think just simply passes, right? More passes that you can make within an offensive possession, right? The
Hmm.
more the defense is going to have to move, right? I think, like I hate like counting passes, but there'll be times where I'll watch the game and I'm like, this possession we had like 4 passes, right? Like we need to just simply be passing the ball more, getting out of our stick quicker when it comes to that, right? So tempo, ball movement, spacing is obviously going to be one, right? But that's dependent on where we are, right? So if we're in like a high wing 2-man game or a 3-man game, right, like your spacing is going to be dictated on there versus if you're in our off ball pair or on the other side of the field, right? Whether we're sealing, slipping, or, just simply cycling off ball, right? So, spacing I think is something that we try and work in those small sided games, right? So say we're going say it's like 44 one side, right? So like, I'm also a big proponent of like that constraints led approach, right? So putting constraints
Yeah.
in where I'm getting what I want to get out of them without, so putting in a few rules but not exactly putting the shackles on them, right, where they can continue to play, right? So say it's 4v4 one sided, right? So one thing I did this past spring with RO, which was really sweet, was that have you heard like the battleship scoring style, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, all right, we're gonna play game to 3, but you have to score on ball, you have to score on an off ball, right? And you have to score like with a nation's look or something like that, right? So
Yeah.
it's really fun to see, like they'll get that on ball dodge score, goal pretty quickly, but then it's like, oh crap,
Yeah.
like now we actually have to make decisions and work to either if it's that off ball, like it's simple rules of like you're trying to get each other open, right? Which is not something. It's usually like clear space for the guy, right? But it's
Yeah.
just clearing space to clear space, not exactly clearing space to be a threat to score, right? So adding in that constraint has been really fun, and what we do in those drills, we'll put, we'll speed up the shot clock, right? So and add certain resets, right? So it's like if we kick the ball through X, so say we have like 4-on-4 with a 15-second shot clock, kick the ball through X and it resets and hit the backside, then it resets the shot clock. You get a fresh 15, right? So it keeps it fresh where it's like if it
Yeah.
gets stale, it's like, all right, kick that ball through X, right? Hit the backside, right? You got a fresh 15, right? That defense is moving a little bit and then you get to attack it again, which is really fun.
Love that. That's great. I was talking to Tim McCormick a few weeks ago, and he mentioned like one of the games that they do, and like you said it earlier, touches. Like you want your players to get touches and make decisions. And to start every practice or the beginning of every practice, they do like small sided, like 3-on-3 from the wing, working on their picks in like a 3-player game. But he has them going on all over the field. So you have every girl that's making a decision. He's like, there's probably like 200 decisions being made, like all the, within 3 minutes of play. But it's just like you're like you said, you want those kids to understand and learn how to read the game and understand and make those decisions, and principles like that. I think they go a long way. And I think that's the way the game is, is playing right now, and it should be played, because it's such a free flowing, chaotic game where you can't just stick to like these plays, or because once they go wrong, like kids don't know what to do.
Right.
And I know
Right. When it
you've,
breaks down,
yeah,
which it will, right? Like
yeah,
what are you going to fall back on, right? So you're going to fall back on those principles, you
yeah,
know? Um, yeah. So it's like even in like pre-practice, so one thing that we've gone away from too, like I've totally gone away from like, all right, this is the stick work that we're going to do, right? Like call it line drills or whatever you may, right? So it's like,
yeah,
how can we get more decisions? How can we get more touches? Like, all right, perfect. We're going to play 3v2 keep away all over the field, right? So find a group of 5, right? And then
yeah,
you can layer on different skills in that, right? So it's like 3v2, but every time we pass, like we're setting an off ball seal, right? Every
yeah,
time we pass, we're going to cut the middle, right? And then you can kind of keep points, right? Like 2 points if you guys can hit a wall pass on that cutter in the middle and kick it back, like, a point for a skip or things like that, right? And it's also O&D, right? That's another like big piece. Like I love in a lot of that small sided stuff, like all position, no position kind of is what I
right,
call it. Right. So it's your D guys getting reps, on O, and then vice versa. Right. Cause another piece of what we do is like push transition. Right. Like I love pushing transition at the high school level.
yeah,
Cause it's really hard to score a settled 6-on-6 like it is. So like an advantage for us is like having principles in transition, but who's pushing transition, right? It's your poles and it's your D middies, right? So like if they don't have
oh
a
yeah,
skill set and an IQ in that 3/4 field transition, right? Like you're not gonna be able to score in transition all that much either, right? So
right,
it's less of like, all right, all of our shorties are gonna be doing keep away. It's like, no, we're gonna get everybody to play keep away. We bought like 5 3-by nets, right? Which was
nice.
awesome. So we just line up 3-by, so we call 3-by Thursday, which is like the best. Like I play, like we have a coaches team, which is awesome. But we're playing like 3-by with tennis balls and short sticks, like for our warm up, right? So like,
Yeah,
we'll do like a little dynamic, and it's like, all right, we're gonna play 10 minutes of 3-by, and it's like, you watch, your defenseman that has a shorty in his hand and a tennis ball, like it's gonna soften up his hands, but he's also gonna be touching the ball, a number of times before you even start your pre-practice, right? It's
yeah,
it's great.
yeah. And just to kind of talk about that a little bit too, is like growing up, like we would always use tennis balls, and like when I was messing around with my brother, like we'd play in the backyard, we used tennis balls because he'd throw me in net, and I'd have pads. Like we use tennis balls. But like it's proven, when you use like balls that are not lacrosse balls, like especially tennis balls, so you can wrap them in tape, like it does force you to adjust your hands, right, and make them softer. And sometimes, like when you bring out tennis balls or like softballs to practice, especially with some younger kids, they're like, "Why are we using tennis balls?" And I think that's such like a key thing. No matter what level you're at. I mean, I've seen college, D1 players use tennis balls, but they're not. You don't just use them to use them, but you're using them for a purpose, right? Obviously, you're
Yeah.
trying to reduce injuries, but like it is so good for your hands, right? And
Well, it's
I
great.
mean,
I mean, I
yeah,
think it's great to shoot too. Like, I
yeah,
think it's underrated shooting, like in 3-by, right? Like, you have to get creative with the ways that you score, right? So, like, shooting around a guy with a tennis ball, guys are way more apt to do that than they would be with
totally,
a regular ball, right?
yeah,
So, like, just
yeah,
being able to find stick angles with tennis balls, it's like they are way more risk taking when it comes to when they have a tennis ball on their stick when they
yeah,
have a regular ball, right? So being able to find different ways to score with those tennis balls, and the soft hands is great with that too. But
yeah.
I think that's like a massively underrated part of tennis balls.
100% agree. I think I saw Denver doing this drill for shooting where they were working on shooting through screens, and they were using tennis balls, but they had to shoot over the defender's shoulder, right? So they
Yeah,
had to did right, and but
yeah,
I mean, so the defenders had to go approach, and the offense had to shoot the ball like through their shoulder, and obviously they're not going to do that with their teammates. But again, to your point, like you're more willing to do that in practice and practice that shot, right? And so
right.
because screen shots are especially at different angles, like they're really hard for goalies to track. So,
Yeah,
and I want to kind of go back on something you mentioned earlier about, watching film, because certainly like college, high school, time commitment and all is a lot different, right? What you can and can't do. But like when you're working with film, especially with your high school players, are you looking more at film for personal improvement, like where kids can get better, or actual scouting, right? I know like the NEPSAC, you can't really scout that much because it's not necessarily allowed. But maybe you could look at previous year's film, right? And like look at what tendencies of what they did. But is it more of like, okay, Sam, look how you approached, him here. This is the kind of angle. Is that where you're pretty much
Yeah.
using it for?
I keep it about us, right? So
Yeah.
it's like there's no film share, so it's like that. It's still paper scouts, of what
Yeah.
we get. So um, it's about us, right? So and I'll watch in a few ways. Like I'll spend a lot of my evenings watching the film, and then these kids at boarding school specifically, like their plates are full, right?
Hmm.
So um, we put it up there. They can watch it on their own. Like with that being said, they have a lot on the academic plate. Our juniors and seniors are going through the college process too. There's a lot for that. So I'll try and find those 3-4 clips that I find best for us and keep it simple at that. Right. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think the bring your whole team in and watch for 45 minutes is like the juice is worth the squeeze on that. I'd rather, all right, let's watch for 15, 20 and then spend that 25, 30 minutes like getting better out in the field. Right. So
Yeah.
it's like I'm watching, I'm like, ooh, whether it's a highlight or a low light, highlighting things that we did really well and the effect that it had, or vice versa, right? Teaching points of when it comes to that, and then we'll
Hmm.
have times like kids have free periods through the day. So if they want to come and watch, individual pieces of things, like we're open for that on their own time,
Yeah.
when it comes to that. But like I said, their schedules are jammed. So I like to
Yeah.
keep it super simple with them and make it digestible for them.
Sure. And you mentioned the recruiting piece of it, right? And especially at the level, the gun is, you're sending kids off to play, top college programs. So like, how are you helping families through that process? Do you have like a direct hand in it? Is it more coming from college counseling, or is it their club team? Like, I feel like that's just really tough to navigate now with club, and these kids play at all different places. They're getting
Yeah.
told one thing from one coach, but they're getting told another thing from another coach. It can be overwhelming, right? And I can, looking back, feeling like if I was a kid playing in this environment, I could say, well, this coach told me I could look here, but my coach and my high school coach says like, oh, I'd be a great fit here, right? I mean, not that you know exactly where, but like, how do you balance that nowadays,
Yeah.
especially with the way that our world is in college recruiting?
Yeah, absolutely. With the roster crunch at the Division 1 level that's been coming down. Like the just the overall talent level increasing each year in the 26s and the 27s. Right, it becomes a lot more difficult to manage, I think, than in years past. But
Mm-hmm.
I always tell our guys like send me your club coach's contact information, right? And I hop on a call with them and like we talk it out through the like I think working together versus being parallel to one another doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? So because there's value add to X, Y, and Z school that I have, and there's value add that that club coach may have, right? And if we can kind of combine our resources, combine our relationships that we have with those college coaches, then it's going to be better off for the kid, right? So,
Yeah.
and then being open and honest, right, of like our evaluations of where we see our guys, right? So they might have a list of these schools, and it's not that we wouldn't, we'll call those coaches and reach out and being honest with those kids about the feedback that they get, whether it be good or whether it not be good, because then you got to pivot, right, and continue to work in the process versus on dwell on it.
Yeah.
You're with college counseling here. That's a big part of it, just in terms of their list. But it's really becomes for us, right around that sophomore, like after the sophomore season, you have your exit meeting with your players, right, and you talk about, all right, like where are you going to be at this summer, and start to build that list, and then you're jumping on that, right away to try and get early eyes on them for that September 1st, right, for them of
Yeah.
their junior year. And then it's like continuing to talk to them, right, and be talking to their club coaches, talking with them. Like I always say, like any contact that you guys get, right, like feed it through me, because you'll get that blanket prospect day email, and say, oh, this school is recruiting me, and it's like, well, not exactly, right? They might like you to come to the prospect day, but like there's a difference between actively being recruited versus that, right? So,
Yeah.
and that can be a tough conversation with kids at times too. Like they're not always the easiest conversations as well, especially now. Like some of our 27s, like 27s are moving hot off the board, these past couple weeks, right? So like continuing them, like, hey, stay patient in the process. Like you never know who's looking. Like, but then when it comes to these November dates, like I tell them, like, it's American Idol, man. You got to sing. Like, you got that opportunity. Like, that coach might be there for that one half. Like, and you got to
Yeah.
make those invisible plays, like make those effort plays, make those smart IQ plays, and also like, play free. Like if you're going to be tight, with knowing those coaches are on the sidelines, right? Like that's the nature of recruiting, right? So you want to be able to kind of get that through them, that to know who's there and know, be educated on, what that weekend looks like for them, but then balancing for them to be able to play at their best too.
Yeah. Not to call out any score right now, but I recently got an email getting invited to a prospect camp. So it's like,
You got a COVID
all
year,
right,
Brett.
I think I got a year left of eligibility, but it was a reach. No, but you're right though. I mean, like it's just like you said, like kids are getting blasted every direction, and it's like, okay, like, let's take a breath and let's just evaluate everything and go through the process and like don't overwhelm yourself, even though it can be really tough.
Right.
And as far as like you've coached high school, college, you've played at the highest levels, college, pro. How have you seen the game, like in your standpoint, to where you are now, like over the years, evolve? Like, what do you think the biggest changes are, and kind of like where do you see, or what? In I guess to that standpoint, like what do you see as the biggest challenges? Whether it's challenges, for the position you're in, or just in general, for our sport. Like we talk about recruiting, right? But in my opinion, like the level of play has almost never been better. The athletes that are playing lacrosse right now, the biggest thing for me is, and you kept hitting on it too earlier about what you try to implement, is that IQ, is decision making, right? And I think that's a place in our sport where we've maybe lost a little bit. But I'd love to hear your opinion, your thoughts on kind of on that front.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. Like, I think the game is like the level of play now is insane, which is really cool to see. Like the athletes are really, really strong. And I think, Brett, like the skill set is like off the charts, right? So
Yeah.
the moves that kids are able, and like the counter moves that they're able to use on, like, I'm just speaking from an offensive perspective, right? Like sure, we had like a wind up and a hitch, like when we were playing was taught to us, but now it's like, man, are you going to wind up face dodge, you're going to wind up roll, you're going to wind up rocker? Like there's all these like counter moves that are taught to kids,
Yeah.
that they all have in their bag, which is really neat. Like the display of finishes of kids now is insane, right? So like leaners,
Yeah.
twisters, like all that stuff was, it also was like fake high, shoot low, which there's value to that, but now it's like you see kids like throwing near and far fakes to get that goalie to actually, move laterally, right? Like, so it's off the charts when it comes to that skill set. With that being said, I think the team play is different than it was previously, where,
Mhm.
I guess I could say where that individual like skill train. A lot of kids are like training individually, right? Which is
Yeah.
great. And like that's why the skill set is insane and off the charts, right? But it's less time, I think, playing within a group, right? So
Yeah.
college level, like that's what you want, right? You want your guys to be able to play seamlessly and play together, and then you factor in like the club scene. Like when I'm at an event and these high level club teams, they're fantastic players, right? But they're also trying to get recruited, right? So with that comes selfish play at sometimes. And if you're a player trying to get recruited and you're not playing selfishly, like if you're an attackman and you're trying to play within the offense, right? And you're not getting as many touches on the ball, like it can, like, then you're not going to get seen, right? So it's a really interesting dynamic when it comes
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah.
And then it's like what's really cool, like the college game, like it's almost essentially positionless now, right? Like you have guys that are able to attack in every spot of the field, right? So it's like, and it's like you watch like Virginia in like Griffin Schuts, like the 6'3" horse middies, like inverting. And it's like,
Hmm.
you would have been an alley dodger, like 10,
Yeah.
15 years ago, like,
Yeah.
here, take that hard
Totally.
alley and go. Like,
Yeah.
and now he's able to like attack from a high wing, a low wing. He's, like those, like, and it's a lot of those players that are able to do things like all over the field, right? Which I don't think we saw, that long ago either.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And I think it's just it's fun to see the game grow, from the youth level all the way up through college, and kind of like you said, the skill levels off the charts. Watching the PLL, watching the college games, like it's a lot of fun because it's so fast. And I think the shot clock has had a big role in that, especially at the college level. Um, and I think that overall, like, yeah, I mean, it's just I think the way we coach, like you said, positionless is, there's still kids that, want to like not run up and down the field, as a midfielder. And like, because maybe they're not never done that. But in my opinion, like if you could play anywhere on the field, I mean, that's a key, for any coach to say like, hey, I trust you to go play here. I'm sure you've done that with some of your players where you saw some potential in a player to maybe try a different position, whether it is like short stick to long stick or vice versa, and they've probably, thrived, but it's just like giving them that chance, letting them see where that potential could lie, because
Yeah.
as a coach, that's kind of your role, is to kind of help that kid find their potential.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
so-
and then like the geographic reach now is wild too. Like
yeah,
there's good players all over the country, right? So it's like we just had an attackman who just graduated, he's an All-American for us at Hofstra now, and he was from Missoula, Montana. Like just
yeah,
insane. So it's cool to see. And I go to these events and watch teams from all over the country, right? So it's like, you look at like this team from Georgia, kids from Atlanta, and it's like, man,
yeah,
they're so skilled. Before it would be like the Texas teams were like great athletes, a little raw, and it's like, those
yeah,
lines are getting blurred now, which is really cool, to see the game's like geographic reach. And, I think if I was a college coach, that's like pretty hard to evaluate. That it's like,
mhm,
sure, your Long Islands and Baltimore's, are still going to be those, but it's like,
yeah,
man, like you can now find a kid from anywhere, right? So, and for us, like I think that's an advantage for boarding school where, this kid from Missoula, like if he stayed where he was at, like I don't know if he was going to get exactly those looks, right? And was able to do like a reclass year with us, and kind of was able to get those eyes that he needed.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And do you guys have PGs? Get me wrong, do you not?
Yeah.
You do have
Yep.
PGs, okay. Yeah, because even that now, there's opportunity. There's always, we've always had post grads, at the prep school. Some's don't allow them, but I mean, there's always that, like you were kind of saying with the recruiting piece of it, like it's like a weird balance because when you are playing this club stuff, you have to like show what you can do, but also you want to show that you are a team player,
Right.
And I try to share with kids too is like, coaches are probably watching what you do off ball as well, right? Like they're not
Definitely.
just seeing what you do with the ball. Like, are you flashing offensively? Like defensively, are you communicating, right? Like that's got to be something that every kid obviously should think about as well, through the process of like, how can I be the best, team player, and kind of circling back on that. I wanted to ask you, but I kind of bounced through, but like on the defensive end, now that you're the head coach and you're overseeing the whole program, you talk a little bit about your offensive principles, right? And kind of how you guys do that. But I feel like nowadays when you play like you guys do, and it's more principles based, it's really hard to guard, right? Like you were saying, dodge down the alley, slide. We got our two slide, recover. Like it was
Yeah.
almost like a system. Like that's how we played in college, and it was like you knew how to go. But like now, guys are dodging from every angle. There's picks everywhere. Like how do you navigate that on the defensive side, and really teach kids kind of that same mindset of like, you got to be fluid, but we also have to make sure that we do have those chain reactions to support each other, right?
Right.
It's got to be
Yeah.
it's so hard.
Yeah, it's really hard, right? Like, and I always think of like as an offensive coach, it's like, how can we create advantage? So
Yeah.
inversely, it's right, how can we limit advantages on the offensive side, right? And like, I still don't, I like an approach cannot be undervalued. Like, so much is dictated on a defender's approach, right? A poor approach, and it's like you're toast, right? And then it puts
Yeah.
you guys in a rough spot, and it's everyone's spinning around after that where your slide's coming from, right? So like a solid approach is a big foundation piece that we look into our defensemen when it comes to that. And then obviously like we talk about communication, but it's really it has to be communicated out through, right? Like if there's any indecisions on any part, like, and you freeze for a split second, now it's like you're giving up a quality opportunity shot, right? So being
Yeah.
able to establish where your hot slide is coming from, is really big, right? So, and that's tougher to see from, right? Like, so if it's like a pair's offense, right? Like, where are you going to come from? You're going to come from the crease and expose the backside, or are you going to come adjacently if it's a sweep and then rotate around it, right? Like you have to have, those principles in your defense of what you're going to do. For us, I still believe in like strong pressure, pressure on ball, pressure adjacently, where if you allow an offense to be comfortable, like then they have the advantage, right? They can kind of pick you apart, right? So, but if you're playing to different hands, or tendencies of players, right? That's a big piece. And then it's like where the game is now, like the 2-man game is huge, right? So it's like you have to be able to rep a 2v2, right? And like how you're communicating, right? Whether you're getting sticky on it, like as that picked man, okay, or is it a heavy hedge? Is it a switch? Like, so we're repping 2v2s like all the time. For offenses, certainly, we're more of like a 3-man game or an off-ball 2-man game, but like defensively, especially those big littles, if we're trying to stick with matchups, like that's something that needs to be repped over and over and over too, of how you're communicating through those picks. So those are probably our defense principles, right? So being able to heat up an offense, like with on-ball pressure, making them uncomfortable, forcing some passes that might be tougher for them to catch with the on-ball pressure that you have, having a solid approach, communicating, right? And being decisive, right? Like even if it's an incorrect slide, right? If you're decisive with your slide in a timely manner, right? We're able to recover around it. It allows us time to. But if you're in between and not really sure, even if you're not even going to show, like if you're still kind of just standing still, then it's like, then it becomes, an advantage of 3v2 or 2v1 somewhere else on the field.
Yeah. And you talk about like the 2-on-2 pick game, and one of the things I tried to do when I incorporated that, especially some of the offensive guys at the college level, and it works both ways for the defense too. But if I'm running, I realized that if I was just working on picks, right, 2-on-2, and we were telling the defense to switch or stay, like they were cheating, right? They knew what was going to happen, and the offense was going to try to react off of it. Whereas like if I said, okay, guys, we're going to do 5 reps here, right, 5 quick reps. Every rep, the defense has to do something different, but it has to be A, B, or C. Right. So now the offense doesn't know what's coming, right? They get 5 reps. So now the defense is working on their switches. They're working on their, getting throughs, and they're working on their doubles, but like the offense doesn't know when it's coming.
Yeah.
So
nice.
like, so it's like, you to really dive into that with those kids, because kids are just going to, like I said, they're just going to cheat when they know what the defense is going to do or the offense is going to do. But I found that to be very effective, especially for our offensive kids, because like, we were more athletes. Our guys didn't really play the 2-man game much in high school. But like when they're playing it like at that level with your level, I think it's going to go such a long way if they want to get to that next level, because you just see how that's going, right? How the sport's evolving in that front. Like like you said, every college team, look at what they're doing, right? They're playing that game all over the field.
Yeah, I mean, it's like giving them a menu of choices, right? And I
Yeah.
think that goes through like throughout what we do on offense and on defense, right? Of like here's what you can do, laying it out for them of choices that they have to make, but knowing, trusting them that they have the IQ to make the right decision, or if it's the wrong decision, right? How can they react from that as well? Is something that's pretty good. So I mean, I might steal that from you too. I like
Go
that.
for it. It's great. No, it's awesome. I mean, I love it. Will Manny said a drill. What they do for communication is they play 5-on-5 or 6-on-6. But for 30 seconds, the defense can't talk, only the offense can talk. And then they flip it, only the defense can, and they realize how important communication is, right?
Yeah.
So it's more of a
Yeah.
drill. So the guys in the field realize, like, hey, no, we really need to talk, And
Yeah.
I was like, I'm gonna use that with my 12-year-olds.
Yeah. I'm
It's
gonna
like
try
our
that.
guys are so quiet.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good one too.
um, but what another front on that skill stuff, and this is how I've evolved as a coach a little bit on my thinking of like growing up, like everyone would teach us as offensive players, and you got to shoot overhand, right? I still truly believe that shooting overhand, really is really hard, especially if the stick's hiding behind your head. Like it's hard for a goalie to say, especially if you change planes. But I've more and more the past 5-6 years of my teachings, I've been teaching kids try to shoot from different angles, right? Like, and knowing when to use them. Like, don't just shoot sidearm to shoot sidearm. Like, maybe shoot sidearm to shoot around a defender, like we were talking about, right? Or maybe if your stick's low, bring it up high. Like, what's your thought process on those kind of teachings, you know, from a skill standpoint offensively of like players like who can, you know, shoot, pass from different angles. Obviously, like, you know, not every ball's going to go in, not every ball's going to cage, but I feel like often like you hear that overhand, you know, and like, yeah, I mean, it's not bad, but like you got to give the kids freedom to explore a little bit and show that like wherever I put my stick angle, I can be more deceptive because now I can keep changing my placement, right?
Right. Yeah, for
So,
sure. I mean, yeah, it's super interesting. Like it's funny because like growing up, like coach's son, it was like,
yeah,
very like overhand, high to low. And like for me it worked,
yeah,
It's I think because I like repped it at nauseum in the backyard, so like I was able to change planes that way. Um,
sure.
but it's like I've definitely changed in my ways of that, right? So it's not, I don't think it's always changing planes either. I think it can be deception, whether it's a step down, like, so it's like kids can still score low to low if they're being deceptive with the right parts of their body. Right. So
Sure.
it's right. So it's like you catch it in a low spot, like, you're lifting that front shoulder up or you're lifting your eyes, right. Just a little bit. And that goalie's, here. Right. And then you can still yank it low. Right.
Yeah.
So, like that release angle is big, like you talked about, but deception of finishes, right? Whether it's, a guy, it's like interesting, once when I worked for 3D for a number of years and like
Yeah.
that's where I like really dove into deceptions of more like in tight finishing, like I didn't realize, how much you really could get into that. And that's like where I started to watch, like I'll watch a ton of box, like just watched like all the Man Cup games, we're just on, a couple weeks ago. And it's like you're watching some of these guys, the way they shoot the ball, they have to in that area. But it's, yeah, they're reaching around everybody or they're coming in, like they're bringing their hands here and yanking it back. Like
Yeah.
they're manipulating the goalie, right? Really is what they're doing. And I think that's like where field players struggle a little bit. And there's still always a place and time for like CNET, shoot to net, or getting it out quick. Some
Yeah.
guys are able to catch it loaded and get it out quick. And a quick release is going to beat, like you said, you were just talking to Willie, like he's got arguably like the best quick release of all time, like in my
Yeah.
opinion. Like,
Totally.
and he's saying he's probably like, I just wanted to get out of my stick quick. I didn't know
Yeah.
exactly where it was going to go. I knew if I wanted to shoot high or low, but that can't be understated too. For me, I was never like able to shoot the ball hard. Like
Hmm.
that wasn't my game either, right? So it was like I got to get out of my stick quickly,
Yeah.
right? So that comes with footwork too, right? Like being able to catch that ball loaded, you know,
Yeah.
is big, So, but yeah, I've kind of gone more away from like the overhand. I think it depends on the level of player, right?
Yeah.
Too, so that kind of more entry mount. If I'm working with like youth kids, right? It's like that's the baseline of where you can start at, and then you can kind of open it up to that, different levels and releases when it comes to that. And it's like you talked about passing, like it's cool to watch some of these PLL games and see the way guys are passing now too. Like I love watching Grant Ament pass the ball because it's like
Yeah.
he's throwing skip passes like from his hip because he knows if he throws it, from his collarbone, like it's going to get picked off. And now, so like that's a part of the game evolving now too. It's like the way these guys are passing the ball from different angles and different release points accurately, like Schreiber does it too.
Yeah.
Where they just throw these like unreal skip passes from their shoelaces, but it's the right pass. It wouldn't get there if it wasn't, right? So, but with that is like just an insane skill level, right? So not everybody can do that. So it's like, as a coach, it's like, I'm not going to be teaching, some high
Right.
school kids, some of our elite players, sure, when you want
Yeah.
them to add on to it, but some of our other guys are younger guys or guys that, maybe a second sport kid. It's like, you know, have a baseline of being able to throw the ball confidently or shoot the ball confidently. And then we can kind of teach different skills and releases from there.
Yeah. And to your point, I think like kids should obviously, you know, try to find out, like, feel themselves out of like what kind of player they are, right? Like, what are they going to do? Like, if like me, like you, I wasn't a big kid. I mean, like, I didn't have the hardest shot, right? I found most of my success off ball in high school, you know, finishing, playing attack, making cuts, finding space, getting that ball in out of my stick quickly. It had changed in college because my position changed a little bit to midfield. But I still didn't have the hard shot on the team. I was more trying to figure out like how I could maybe get that assist or that Gretzky pass that some coaches call it. So,
Yeah.
but I think like to your point though, like kids should try to get a sense of who they are as a player, and just take it and go run with it, and it'll change over the years, right? Like if I'm a kid that hasn't can't really dodge that great, but I got a hard shot, like maybe I should be trying to find my way to work more off ball to get my hand free for a shot, right? Like I think
Right.
that's something that we have to do with kids, at all from all ages, but like super young, we want them to keep playing, have some fun. But as you get older, especially at the high school level, you get in there, like, just, take some pride in that and just try to find that kind of player you want to be and run with it. Like you don't have to be somebody else, right?
Right.
You don't have to be somebody
Right.
else. Just be you and play your game. And no matter what offense you're in, like you were saying, your 2-man, a 3-man game, like any kid can find a role in that, if they want to, right? But they have to obviously have the work ethic. But whether you're one of the initiators, one of your off-ball guys, like there's a spot for it if you want it and you work hard enough.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like, as a coach, what we can do well with that, and what I try and do is like highlight that. So like I call those
Yeah.
like invisible plays, right? So it's like, sure, the kid that kickstarts our offense, right? And draws a slide or creates an advantage, right? Like most likely, like the dodge and alley and hit one on the run, like doesn't happen all that much anymore, right? So it's that kid that makes that invisible play that sets something up, maybe 2-3 passes later, right? And it's like, that's what I'll highlight, right? Like whether,
Yeah.
in those film sessions or even just if it's in practice, like I'll stop it and make it a point of emphasis of like, hey, that was, you started that. Like, like one thing, that Mike had that was awesome. So we went to Cornell Yale this past spring, and like Kirst was just unbelievable. He had like 6 in the first quarter. It was insane. But like the one thing I noticed about him, like about Kirst, was like he celebrated his teammates like incredibly well. That had nothing to do with him. Like, and so we implemented, like we called it Kirst rules. So like that,
Nice.
that stud that we had, like he would score, but then like we would make it mandatory, be like, all right, well, who set all that up? Sometimes sure it was him like getting to the rack, but other times it was like, no, like we drew that slide, we kicked it to you. He set that really nice pick for you off ball or on ball, like, and that freed you up. Like that's what you need to celebrate, and
Yeah.
saying as coaches, we can do a better job of like recognizing the play before the player, 2 plays before it that, allowed us to have the high opportunity that we scored on.
Yeah. And I love that. That's good stuff. As we kind of close things out here, I just have 2 questions maybe for you that I guess you can answer any way you want. But
Yeah.
the first one being, as a player, right? Having had the success you've had at all levels, high school, college, pro, what advice would you give yourself, if you were to talk to yourself back then in high school? What advice would you give yourself, as you were looking through these next 10 years of your life, from high school to college to after college?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think it would be a couple things, right? Like I always loved playing. I don't think that ever changed. Like whether it was at practice, like I loved like being on Garber Field was like my dream.
Mm.
That's all I ever wanted to be at. Probably the same for you. And like that was it. Like I cherished every moment that I had on there. And then I would like love playing in the backyard too. When it came to that, but I think what you were talking about earlier would be a really good point of like find a player that you could emulate your game off of. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, my generation is like, YouTube started and I might have had 1,000 views of Mikey Powell's highlight video, right? Like, it
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
trying to be him. And it's like, I don't know if that was like best suited to my game, or it's like, Kyle Harrison, like those types of guys that it's like, man, and I'm like practicing, like his like 1-hop split dodge. And it's like, I don't know if I ever had that like in my bag, whether I worked on it at nausea or not.
Yeah.
So being able to find that, I think
Yeah.
like from a physical standpoint, I think I could have paid a lot better attention to my diet,
Mm.
and like how I was treating my body. Right. And like, that wasn't exactly a thing back then, like
Yeah.
In college, we had the #1 campus or dining hall, in the country. And like, we
Cheesesteaks.
had a nutritionist, and like, I didn't
Yeah.
use those extra resources. Right. So like, I took pride in like the extra reps that I put in,
Hmm.
out like practicing after practice. Like, my mindset was like, in order to do what others can't, you have to be willing to do what others won't, and that
Yeah.
was, if I wasn't 6'4", 215 pounds, like how was I going to create an edge? And that was from extra reps. But, I think I could have eaten a lot cleaner, like paid attention to that, met with our nutritionist, used the resources that I had at that level. And then, like I hit the weight room. I would meet with Canelo and he'd be like, if you just could gain, X, Y, and Z pounds, and I'm like, I'm trying over here, like, so, but I never, as much as I put into playing, like I should
Yeah.
have had that equal on the other end of it, of treating my body the right way, eating clean, all of that little stuff. Cause that would have, I think, made a big difference, for me
Sure.
physically, and would have allowed me to open up my game a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, I remember eating like cheesesteaks the night before practice. I'm like, what am I doing? But like back then, you could get away with it.
Right. 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 Exactly.
Now I do
Exactly.
that. I wake up in the morning. I'm like, oh my God, what did I do
Yeah.
with myself?
Yeah.
Um, no, that's great. That's good. That's good stuff. And then, as a coach, yeah, if you were to give advice to like another coach, right? Like I've always said this, like I love talking to coaches because I love hearing, their kind of their mindset, how they coach. Like you're talking about your principles. I love it. I try to absorb it all because I try to use it in however I can. I take little pieces of, where I try to fit stuff in. And so I've never told anyone, like this is how you need to do it. But, there's obviously, you can go get great, advice everywhere. But if you were to give advice to like a young coach who's just getting into it, maybe who's starting maybe a high school path, right? Because they see something similar to like what you're doing, how it's like the right fit with academics and family life. What advice would you give a coach like that, whether it's how they should approach maybe the program, or like how they can implement some of the you know kind of principle based stuff that you try to do with your kids? Because I think that is so huge and that goes such a long way.
Yeah. I think it's twofold, right? So one is, like, be a sponge.
Yeah,
There's more out there now to educate yourself than ever before, right? And it's some conflicting opinions on
yeah,
some things, how coaches feel, but like there's so many things that you can go out and watch, and the game's so much more accessible now to be able to consume content, whether it's a pod or whether it's a YouTube video or watching a game, right? Like, so, you know, find your way that you're seeing the way different coaches operate. Try and pick and choose what you think's best fit for your kids, and be open to it. It's cool to see. Like, I've known my dad as a coach for a number of years now, and like I remember him growing up being like that. Like, this is the way it's done. You shoot the ball this way, you pass the ball this way, and then I'll still be able to coach with him. He comes on spring break for us, and it's like
nice.
I'll give him a group of like 6 to 8 kids, and he's doing this stuff, and I'm like, you wouldn't have done that, 25 years ago. So like he's a perfect example of like he's been in the game for, going on 40 years now. And it's like he's still always like trying to pick and choose, pick things up from other people, learn things from other people. So continuing to do that, being a sponge on that is like the best, right? And if you really love the game, like it's not a hard thing to do, like
Sure.
like I can't find my way off of lacrosse field, right? So it's like, and then if you're going with like the principles based play and the constraints and things that you put in, like it's okay if it looks really, really messy. Like we've
Hmm.
had practices that like look terrible, and like it's funny because Mike would be like, you're like, I don't know about this, and I'm like, it's fine. Like it's fine. Like it's going to be messy. Like, and you
Yeah.
have like where like the whole practice might look super messy versus like that was a really tight practice. That was an awesome practice, right? Where you think it looks great and it might not really be that way. Like where I see if we're making mistakes and the right types of mistakes, that's opportunities for them to learn and opportunities to grow. So knowing
Hmm.
if that's what you're going to adopt, like it's not going to be great. It like every time, there's going to be, in those like 4v4s or 5, whatever the drill small sided is, like it might look really, really gross, and you want to just shut it down. And like, I also hate like stopping a drill when it comes to that too. As much as I want to blow the whistle, it's like, no, they need to figure it out. Like there's players play, like, at the end of the day, like that's what I loved about Coach Cannell. Like that's what he would always be like, it's you guys, right? Like this is your ship, and he gave us like the keys to really do that, which was really neat. I don't think a lot of guys do that. So that's like what I try and tell our guys too, is not like to overcoach things. Like explaining a drill for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, talking ad nauseum, I think is like 3 or 4 minutes of wasted time. It's like, tell them the drill, get them going, get it going and have the environment do the teaching for them.
Save that talk for post-practice or pre-practice.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love it. It's good advice, and you mentioned, your father. I remember coaching with him at Peak. I tried to absorb all that stuff, as a young kid, learning from him and all those other great coaches like Jim Warnock you had mentioned. So like you said, like you just got to be a sponge, surround yourself with people who love the sport and know the sport and, take in everything, right? That's good stuff.
Absolutely.
All right. This has been awesome.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it, Brett.
Really enjoyed it. And I do tell people if, they should always go check out the campus there at Gunn because it's beautiful. It's good stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Come on down. Check it out. Yeah, good stuff. All right.
Cool. All right.
All right,
Thanks, man.
You got it.
Talk soon.